Welcome to episode 7 of Vox Pop, and this week we talk to Duncan from Gloucestershire. Duncan has been listening to the podcast for a little while. He had something to say. I'm very pleased that he contacted us because, yes, I think he does too. So we're talking about a lot of the usual issues that we're dealing with on a daily basis at the moment, but also he brings his experience as somebody that works in and advises companies on personnel issues into the discussion. So I hope that you find this short podcast interesting. Without further ado, Duncan from Gloucestershire. Hello to you.
Hello, Sam. How are you?
I'm very well. Good to speak to you at last. It's been we've been texting and what have you for a little while, haven't we? In terms of having a sit down and having a bit of a chat about the current sort of score and what have you. With perfectly timed today because we're recording on Tuesday the 14th of September, and it's been well, I don't know if it's been a big day because all these announcements are all taken with a pinch of salt as far as I'm concerned nowadays. But have you had chance to listen to the Fat Blair's, I was going to call him the Prime Minister, Fat Blair's announcements this afternoon?
No, I haven't actually,
No.
and that's partly because I avoid the news as much as possible, and I generally pick up the latest things from Twitter. But I've been at a funeral this afternoon, so I have been completely dark, so I know nothing.
Right. Well,
about what's been going on. So do feel free to fill me in if you like.
Well, to be honest, a lot of it, I watched the edited highlight twice, and it washed over me, and I honestly can't really remember what he said, because he blusters along in that idiotic, what I think used to be slightly endearing sort of manner, which now I just find really annoying.
Yes.
He basically has gone back on everything again that was announced on whenever it was Sunday and then was renounced yesterday. He's basically said the plan is that we will reserve options to do everything we did before again, plus a vaccine passport, and we will bring the vaccine passport in within a week if we need to, should cases rise. So lockdowns are still available, mask wearing still available to them, and then they're obviously going to hijack us with a 7-day roll-in. So basically every business is now going to have to prepare for something which they've said yesterday or Sunday they were not going to do. And I think, in fact, Javid said it either this morning or yesterday again, that he could see no reason to do it. So the thing that they can see no technical reason to do, they're going to plan for and introduce within a week when they need to. So that's pretty much it. And then, of course, there's the vaccination of children using Gillick competence loophole. So it's been a wonderful 72 hours, really.
Well, what a day! Well, it was probably worth a funeral, wasn't it, to miss all that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I suppose. I mean, I have to say that nothing. I mean, I think most of us on what you might call our side have got to the point quite some time ago where literally nothing would surprise us anymore.
Yeah.
And I noticed when I still used to occasionally glance at the BBC website, and this is going back well over a year. Yes, considerably more than a year, I think. The thing I noticed was that the minute the media started talking about it, it was going to happen.
Yes.
And I used to call it seeding. I'm sure I'm not the only person to have done that, but I used to think, well, if it's being seeded in the media, whether it was passports, vaccinations, or lockdowns, or masks in schools, masks everywhere else, the minute you saw it being floated by the media, you just thought, well, they're hand in glove anyway with the government, so it's going to happen. So I would try and make whatever changes, preparations I could, because I knew it was coming, and I can't think of anything that didn't come in after being seeded. So, but I guess now it's the PM himself doing the
Yeah,
the seeding.
Well, I suppose it is. I mean, it was already, as you say. I to be honest now, I mean, I don't watch TV like a lot of people. I haven't for a long time, but a lot of people now don't watch much in the way of TV. But so I just get it from snippets and what have you on the internet. But it was pretty. I mean, I think there's an element. There has to be an element. I read. And I forgot the name of the book. I'm bloody awful at remembering these things. A State of Fear, is it, with Laura Dodsworth?
That's the one. I'm currently approximately 2/3 of the way through it, but I have to keep putting it down because it makes me so angry. And I don't really want to bandy the word depressed around, because it doesn't really make me depressed, but it just makes me so angry that I can only take that book in small chunks because it just drives me crazy.
Yeah. I read it by audiobook because I just find it so much easier when you're in the car and things. You can just turn it on and you can listen to a couple of hours on a journey somewhere.
Yeah.
And it probably makes it a little bit easier because it's a bit like listening to a podcast. But what I found, I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but to be honest, none of what she said in the book, I don't think there was anything that surprised me other than, I mean, it was a really well researched and referenced book. So whereas if I'd said it would have just been some Looney Tune saying these things, she had actually looked into it, referenced it, spoken to some people around the great and the good, and had actually got the evidence. So I think it was really useful, and I think she's done a great job in highlighting to what I would call normies, to use the kids' terms, in terms of people that would perhaps wouldn't have thought any of this was possible. Well, I didn't really think much of this was possible, but so I think she's done a good job in highlighting just how depraved these people are and how much they're. I mean, I consider ourselves the enemies now I consider the state my enemy. I don't trust them. I think they have no interest in my. And when I say my best interest, I don't mean me personally. I mean, as a citizen, I don't think they have any interest in our best interests at all, which is, as you say, not depressing, but it does make you rather angry. But none of it was new to me, I don't think. Perhaps some bits, but I was aware of the 77th, and I was aware of all the various departments sort of linked to GCHQ and the disinformation and the way that they seed, as you say, things into the media. The complicity of the media has been pretty obvious over the last 18 months, I think. Is there anything new for you, or is it just a confirmation of what you suspected or already thought?
Well, I mean, I haven't finished the book yet, as I said, and apart from learning technical things such as the name of different departments and that sort of thing, no, there was nothing really that was new or surprising, but it was a bit of a shock to just see it set down in the way that it has been. But it's interesting, actually, what you say about normies, and I agree that's a increasingly kind of tempting term to use. I mean, for example, I was down in Cornwall a few weeks ago, and I happened to have one of those wonderful life-affirming conversations with somebody that I just happened to be sitting next to on the harbour. And, you sort of raise your eyes and just sort of, get chatting, and, one of you lets slip something that's a little bit sort of anti the narrative. And then suddenly, of course, the floodgates open, and within 2 minutes, you're both saying, "Oh, have you heard of so-and-so? Do you listen to James Delingpole? Do you do this? Do you do that?" And of course, very often the answer is yes. And this chap reached into his bag and said, "Have you ever heard of this book?" And before he pulled the book out, I thought, I know what that book's going to be. And he pulled it out of his bag, and it was Laura Dodsworth's book, A State of Fear. And I said, "Well, yes, I do know." And I just told him pretty much exactly what I've told you, that I'm partway through it. But I wonder whether that book is getting to the normies in the first place. It's being read by people on what we might call our side. But is it even on their radar? Because I don't think it is, because everyone on the normie side that I've spoken to about it has never heard of it. And that's a problem.
Yeah,
or one of the problems. One of the main problems.
No, you might well be right. It's very difficult to. I mean, of course, the problem. I mean, because I don't watch TV, I haven't watched TV for probably 6 years, but I don't watch TV. But the danger with that, it's not that I think I'm missing anything of value, because I'm certainly not, but it's a bit like it's the equivalent of the water cooler moment. You're not getting the same information as everybody else. It's very difficult, especially if you're working from home or not in an office environment. It's very difficult to get an idea of what the average person is thinking. And together with things like Twitter, if you're bouncing around in an echo chamber in social media with people that are of like mind, it is quite difficult to establish exactly what the average Joe is thinking. So no, I think you make a fair point there. I think what is good.
No, go on. Sorry.
No, fire on.
Well, I was going to say that I think I totally agree that it's very difficult to know what they're thinking, but I think we can make a reasonably educated guess based on people's behaviour. And I'll give you a small example, and it's from this very day. So I went to this funeral, and my uncle who died was a very well-liked individual. So he was 83 and he was very sick. So it wasn't a surprise that he died, bless him. And the funeral was pretty well turned out. There were probably 60 odd people there, something like that. I don't know actually, but maybe I don't know how many people are allowed, but it seemed like there were quite a few.
Yeah.
Now, I'm pretty sure that apart from the priest, it was a Roman Catholic funeral, but apart from the priest, I think there were 4 of us in the congregation that didn't wear a mask.
Oh,
now, masks in that church are not compulsory, and they're quite a light touch on things like that. I read their guidance just out of sheer interest, so I wasn't planning on wearing one anyway. And I was one of only 4 without a mask on. And then it was one of these churches that's got a little church hall next door, and they did the usual cups of tea and cake and whatnot afterwards. For an Irish Catholic funeral, it was startlingly dry, I have to say. I was expecting bottles of Jameson's, but nothing of the kind, sadly. Anyway, that's another story. So anyway, we get to this wake next door, and of course, everyone's got their mask off, and they're hugging and talking and chatting away, and it looked completely normal. And it could have happened at any day in any year in history, potentially. Yet the very same people were shuffling into the church next door, diligently wearing their masks. And I said to my wife as we were driving home, I said, it's just conditioned ritualistic behavior. And one thing she said to me was, can't they see how ridiculous it is? They're voluntarily wearing a mask in a church, yet they're removing it in the wake afterwards. But no one seemed to comment on it. It just seemed normalized. It was, well, yes, we do these ridiculous things because that's what we do now. And I detest the phrase new normal beyond words that I have to describe how much I hate it.
Yeah.
But we came away just utterly despairing at this sheer acceptance. So going back to the point I made a couple of minutes ago, even though we may not know quite how they feel and what they think, I think we can deduce from their behaviour that they have absolutely been conditioned in a way that Laura Dodsworth does talk about in that book.
Yeah, I think conditioning definitely, and I do actually put a lot of it down to. I've always been, certainly in the last 5 years, I've certainly not been somebody who's been a great believer in the state, but I think. And sort of politically, I've never been a fan of big state anyway. But I think the fact that I wasn't watching TV and I don't listen to... I used to listen to Radio 4 in the morning, Today programme religiously, 10 years ago probably. And I just slowly over time just got to the point where I just thought, well, it just ruins my morning. I'm not going to listen to this rubbish anymore. So I stopped doing it. But therefore, you think, well, the good thing is, because I think we're all open to, I think we can all be conditioned, but I think the good thing is that if I think I'm lucky that I wasn't watching the TV and I wasn't listening to the radio, and those people that do regularly consume mainstream media and are still able to wade through it and see through it, I've got a great deal of respect for, because you know, I wonder whether if I had been open to it, if it had been, because it's been on constantly, has it, as far as I can understand it. I mean, whenever I get in the car, put the radio on, it was just constant, so I used to turn the radio off and put a podcast on instead.
Yeah,
but
that's exactly what I do.
Yeah, so
yeah.
I mean, but my mother, who's in just, you know, about just nearly 80, she, you know, she watches BBC, she watches ITV, she's on her own, she watches TV, it's in the background most of the day, and I pop over to see her. It's just constantly in the background, telling you all sorts of horrors. I turn it off as soon as I go in, and just I mean, she doesn't.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame you.
It's background noise to her anyway. But the trouble is, you do absorb it, and she has a completely different view of what's happening to me, as you might expect.
Yes, well, I think that generation. I mean, I've been having discussions about this very thing. I mean, my mother's 80, and she certainly doesn't believe everything she sees on the television, but she does watch the news every day, as that generation do, and they grew up trusting the BBC. And it was that sort of cultural conditioning that, you know, you trusted what you were told because you were maybe because you were a trustworthy person yourself, and it wouldn't occur to you. But I had a similar journey to you. I mean, I discovered Radio 4 in my early 20s because I was just fed up with Radio 1. And I suddenly discovered, you know, a guilty pleasure was the Archers.
Yes, yeah.
But I used to love the Archers back when it was gentle and nice. And then I think I'm right in saying this, that a new producer took over, or a new kind of editor, who used to work for EastEnders. Dreadful thing that is, isn't it? But you know, and then it got all sort of I think it tried to get all gritty and you know, realistic and all the rest of it. And then I just switched off, and I was the same with you with the Today programme. I just used to get angry, mainly because of John Humphreys just interrupting people constantly, and I slowly drifted away from radio, and then I got onto Six Music because it actually played stuff that was reasonably decent. And in about 2016, 2017, I discovered podcasts as my main media. I haven't watched television for years. I haven't had a TV license for several years now. And it's basically just new media and podcasts now completely. And I'm not sure if this is a record. I'm sure it's not. But I'm in the privileged position of having never once watched or listened to a COVID propaganda advert. I've never listened to one.
I must have seen one on YouTube or something, I think, but I've never seen, you know, in the flesh, so to speak. But
I mean, it's just horrendous. I mean, I've heard this said by lots of people, and it's nothing new, and I'm sure you've experienced this, but people who I considered some of the most intelligent people that I've ever met appear to have, it's almost like they've drilled a hole in the side of their head, removed their brain, replaced it with I don't know, a sponge or something, and they're just, and this might be people that were worldly, cynical, skeptical, you know, a good laugh, very intelligent with a really good sense of humor. But they're taking all this deadly seriously with absolutely no questioning whatsoever. And if I knew the reason for that, you know, you could bottle it and sell it, couldn't you? Because, you know, governments would buy it from you. Well, maybe our government has bottled it and sold it and is selling it to other countries, according to what Laura Dodsworth says. Exactly. So, you know, that's, yeah. So, I mean, our journey sounds reasonably similar. Yes, it is indeed science. Absolutely, yes.
I mean, I do think, I mean, we'll perhaps move on to other subjects, but I do have to admit that, and I said this in a previous podcast, very early on, probably the first week of the first lockdown in March, I think it was, wasn't it, last year? I was still on Facebook at the time, and
Yeah, I was
Brendan
then.
Brendan O'Neill was on. I was following Spiked, and Brendan O'Neill was saying, "We have got to. This is very dangerous. We've got to, we've got to watch our civil liberties, etc., etc." And totally with him on, not giving. Once you give stuff up, it's difficult to get it back. But I was still of the view that, yeah, but this is England. It's we're not living in a banana republic, and it is unprecedented. If it's as bad as everyone seems to be saying it is in China, you've got all that Chinese stuff going on with people falling over in the street.
Yeah,
So
that was convincing, wasn't it? Those videos.
Exactly. But you think, well, nobody really. I get it that the government have got to be seen to be doing something because nobody knows. I was thinking if I was in charge, I'd be thinking, well, God, I mean, if you get it wrong, you could kill hundreds of thousands of people. They were saying 500,000 people were going to die and all this sort of stuff. Ferguson was. So the first week or two, I had some sympathy, and I think I did comment on a Facebook string of Brendan O'Neill and said something like, look, I get where you're coming from, but I think probably you're over egging the pudding here. I really don't think it's we're going to lose our civil liberties over 2 or 3 weeks. If I can understand why we're locking down for 3 weeks to flatten the curve to stop the NHS being overrun. So I'd heard all of that, and I was like, yeah, it kind of makes sense. I was more for herd immunity, but I could see that if the hospitals got overrun, then people would die that needn't die. So I was kind of that view until about the second 2.5 weeks into the first lockdown, and then I just suddenly thought, I know what it was. It's when they announced that they were going to spend £2 billion on cycle lanes.
Yes,
I thought,
that was interesting.
And I'd already heard. I was already very aware of the World Economic Forum and the new normal and all that sort of stuff. And when they started announcing as part of their COVID response that they were going to spend £2 billion on cycle lanes for the new normal, I thought, I got it. I see. I've been had.
Yep. Yeah. I think, again, at the risk of this turning into a mutual fan club, I think I was pretty much the same. I remember, because I didn't watch the media, I didn't really know anything about this Chinese virus thing they were talking about, because I gave up watching television years ago because I just hate it, and so I just kind of ignored it, really. I just thought, it's just one of these stupid scare stories in the media. And then, of course, it got bigger and bigger. And then, I did watch the Boris Johnson press conference when he announced the lockdown on the 23rd of March. And I did subsequently have to watch others, particularly the ones with Rishi Sunak, because they involved my professional life, which I know you want to move on to at some point if we've got time. Yeah. But I wondered whether one of the questions you would ask me, either through the conversation or specifically, was, roughly when my sort of eyes were open that something definitely wasn't entirely right. And this may seem sort of somewhat esoteric, but I think it was probably the 10th of April, 2020. And the reason I say the 10th of April, 2020 was that I've always been into poetry, and I did English Lit A-level, failed it spectacularly because I was young and stupid, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And one of the poems I enjoyed was a poem called Afternoons by Philip Larkin.
Right.
I'm not sure if you know it, but
I'm just trying to think. I love Larkin, actually, but I'm not sure if I know that one.
It's the one that begins... summer has faded and the tulips pushing ones and twos past the recreation ground, and so it goes on. Right. It's one of these bleak urban... it reminds me of some of the songs by Suede, actually, or one of my favourite bands, and it reminds me of that sort of bleak sort of urban angst that you get in a lot of Suede songs by Brett Anderson. But anyway, I digress. So I actually wrote a reworked version of that poem, with apologies to Philip Larkin, of course, about lockdown, because I was feeling quite strongly about it, and I just wanted to do something creative, and I was just moved to write this. And I coincidentally, sometime later, a year later, I think probably, I was listening to the Gus String with Hector and Simon, And Hector read a Philip Larkin poem, and I ended up sending this poem to Hector because I thought, oh, you might like it. And Simon very kindly read it out on the show on the 1st of June this year. And
that's why it's familiar. All right, I heard it. Yes.
It seemed to. Yeah, people seem to like it. I think it struck a bit of a chord. And so in a very roundabout way, purely because I happened to have I looked at the document that I wrote on my computer, and of course you can look at when it was created. And it was created on the 10th of April. So by then I was definitely somewhere down, I don't know, is it the rabbit hole or was it something else? But anyway, it was roughly the same time as you. By the sound
Almost exactly by the sound of it, yeah. That's interesting. I mean, there's obviously must have been more than just that happened. It must have been a conflagration of different things that made us click.
Well, it was. There was one other thing which struck a chord with me the bombshell of the whole 28-day... Well, let me start again. A death for any reason within 28 days of a positive test. Now, when I heard that, I thought I could see it for how ridiculous it was. And again, going back to the normies, they don't seem to get it. And I had a fairly heated conversation with somebody recently, and I just said, don't you get the implications of that? And he was going, oh, no, not really. But anyway, I need to be careful I don't name names here or say anything too specific, but in my professional life, I have reasonably regular dealings with lawyers. I'm not a lawyer myself, but I work in a kind of semi-legal field. And this lawyer, who I've known for 25 years, rang me up and said, I've got a coronavirus story for you, because he was a bit skeptical at the time as well. And he went on to tell me that a friend of his who is senior, again, I'm choosing my words carefully here. I guess you can edit it if I say too much. Yeah. But somebody, let me put it this way, somebody very senior in a large organization of what we'll call care homes of a type, he was contacted by the state. I don't know who it was, but it was some organ of the state, and instructed to report every death as a COVID death. And these are facilities where people rarely leave alive, unless they're in for respite care. And my friend told me this, and I trust him. And he wouldn't tell me that if the person hadn't told him that, because lawyers, as you know, are very careful in what they say and what they don't say. And he told me this very much off the record. And I haven't named any names, so that's fine, I think. But I put the phone down and I thought, that is, to use the vernacular, well dodgy. Because I thought, why would they do that? And I thought, well, okay. The most charitable explanation I can come up with is that they wanted to ramp up the death figures because the disease was really serious and they just needed more evidence to get people to do the right thing, because it genuinely was a very serious disease for everybody. And I spent about 2 minutes analysing that charitable opinion, and I completely discounted it because I just thought, no, that's utter rubbish. There's something very wrong going on. Now that, Sam, may have been before the 10th of April last year. So that might have been my first moment when it was a sort of like a silver bullet through the head. And I thought, no, there's something seriously wrong in the state of England.
Yeah. I especially as I've had this discussion with my brother, who's of like mine, thankfully, otherwise it would make life difficult. But and we've had the discussion about it, and it seems to me that in any national emergency, a government would usually be desperate to try to calm the populace.
Precisely. That's exactly what I think. Yeah. Sorry, please.
It's clearly they've done exactly. They've spent £500 million doing exactly the opposite, to the point where, going slightly off the subject, I don't want to cover the same stuff many times, but I do think that I am now very much of. You probably know you've listened to other podcasts. You know my view on things, but I listened to the podcast with the Lockdown Skeptics podcast, or the one that's Tim Price and James Bembridge were on, and it's been promoted quite a lot on Twitter this week.
It's on my listen. It's on my listen to list, but I was on holiday, I think, when it came out, and but I've got it downloaded and it's ready. It's ready to go.
Well, it's good. It's worth listening to. I listened to it with an open mind. I think Tim absolutely demolished James's side of things. But I totally get. First of all, I get that James is in the industry and has a reputation to protect. So, as they say in the podcast, it's very easy to go down these conspiracy routes, but you lose your reputation if you're wrong, or even if you're right. Frankly, you're on the wrong side of it. As with James Delingpole will freely admit, that the problem is that once you jump the shark, you're even if you're right, you're against the establishment, you're against everybody else. It's not good. It's unlikely it's gonna, you're gonna see it come good for you. But it's a matter of principle, isn't it? Really. But
well, yes, I think it very much is. But I do think there's people out there that think that they're still going to get a seat at the table.
Yes.
And as I think it was George Carlin once said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. And I think, there are, again, not wishing to name names, but there are certain figures with what you might call one foot in the establishment and one foot in the new media. And it's not difficult to perhaps guess who I might be talking about. As you've mentioned, James Delingpole already, his counterpart appears to be holding on to the idea. I don't know if he still is, actually, because I haven't listened to this week's London Calling yet, but Toby and James do provide quite a good yin and yang, or whatever you want to call it, on that podcast. But it is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain the position that this is just a cock-up. When you see what's happening in countries like New Zealand, Australia, and others, where China appears to have a greater or lesser influence on things, I can't help wondering whether the cock-up is, maybe it's one of compliance. I mean, I know that's not excusable, but I don't know. I really don't know, but I must listen to Tim. I like Tim. Yes. Tim Price, actually. He's his podcast, State of the Markets, is good as well.
Well, I haven't really listened to. I think I've listened to one of his podcasts, but I will listen to more now. I've heard him on, I think, Gus String before, and he was very good on this. I mean, what to praise him? I mean, you should listen to it because it's very good. But, primarily, as you'll have heard with James Bembridge before, he was making the point that, well, show me the evidence. And Tim, I think, pretty articulately laid down everything that's the factual reality of what is happening. In other words, the fact that they had the COVID virus war games, was it 2 years before? I think it was 2018 or 19, I can't remember. Yeah, and then they had there's all of the financial side of things that's really rolled in from 2008 onwards, and the fact that things haven't really been resolved from that. And then lots of things from almost 100 years ago where people have been saying, the sort of all the usual suspects of all the normal people that get talked about in these things, saying that a new world order was required, a one world government, a single currency, all this sort of stuff, and the way that every government has unilaterally, supposedly, come up with the same solution, which is that we must have a biometric ID, and the biometric ID, of course, is anyone with half a brain knows is going to be linked to your social credit score, your bank account, any new currency that's brought in. The whole thing, the fact that they are so profligate with everybody's money and they're just blowing money like they're not going to pay it back, says to me they never expect to pay it back, because there's going to be a reset of the financial system. And the thing that I thought was most interesting recently, last couple of weeks, which I'd heard before, was that Sweden, I'd always been very impressed that Sweden had not panicked like everybody else. And it now transpires apparently that the population in Sweden are something like 85 or 90% bought into biometric ID already. So there's no real need. They're already, culturally, they're quite open to having this, effectively a Vax Passport. So they don't have, whereas in England, we've always been very much against IDs. So we have to be conditioned and scared into it. Whereas someone like Sweden, they haven't had to go through that because they're already there. So my view is that all of this is to push us into a Vax Passport, and the Vax Passport is to bring in the new currency. And whilst I don't know whether or not COVID was, I think it could have been man-made, I think it probably was man-made. I don't know that it was necessarily released by somebody to create all of this, but I think the fact that it happened certainly has been exploited by those people. Well, Klaus Schwab says it openly. This is an opportunity that we mustn't let go of. You know, we must.
He does indeed. Well, I remember when I heard Mike Eden back in the early days when he first started speaking out, and this must be over a year ago, and he used the phrase convergent opportunism. Now, he used that phrase at the time. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he'd use a different phrase now. It's entirely possible that he would. But I think, you know, when you look at the excessive number of new millionaires, new billionaires, the government contracts that are being thrown out to all their cronies, you know, that you know, some might take the view, well, okay, there's a lot of corruption, but, you know, it's going to blow over. But I share your fears that I think, you know, vaccine passports morph into digital ID morphs into central bank digital currency. And I was talking to a friend of mine at the weekend, and he's a financial guy. He used to do pensions and mortgage broking, and he understands that. I mean, he's not a stockbroker or anything like that, but you know, he's in the finance industry. And I mentioned to him about the central bank digital currency, and he just kind of shrugged. And I thought, well, you know, but is it that they don't? It reminds me a bit of the The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, where you've got the two-tier population, and one of them just lives this sort of idyllic life, but then every evening a few of them
the Morlocks come up and grab a couple of easy human sacrifices from the
yes, that's it, the Eloi and the Morlocks, isn't it? And I find that people's reaction to when somebody drops dead of the vaccine is a little bit like the Eloi to their fellow Eloi. It's just they, you know, if you feel like shaking someone by the shoulders and saying, look, perfectly healthy people are being killed by this vaccine, like that BBC reporter, for example, to name one of many. But it's like their eyes glaze over and a little filter in their mind just starts playing mood music and a test card, and they just zone out from what you're saying. And like I said, it's like part of their brain has been removed, and it almost like there's a perception filter that they. I'm not suggesting there is literally a perception filter, but I'm suggesting that they're. But maybe it's that. And again, this quote has been used many, many times, but it's far easier to fool people than it is to convince them they've been fooled. And I think that boils down to ego and self-image. You know, there's an awful lot of people wandering around who think they're far too clever to fall for government propaganda. And of course, the only thing I would suggest that the government has done well in this entire pandemic, the only single thing they've done well is the psychological operation. Yeah. And it's something that any previous dictatorship would be proud of.
It is stunning, and they don't really make Well, as you say, if you read Laura Dodsworth's book, they openly talk about it to her, and you don't have to go very far to see the evidence of it. I mean, everyone's aware of the various departments that exist and all the rest of it. I find it stunning. On the Vax Passport, though, that's interesting, because that was something I wanted to talk to you about, was because the Vax Passport, as I say, they've threatened to bring it in at 7 days' notice, and thereby they have required all large businesses, or all businesses really, to prepare now for bringing in the Vax Passport, because no business wants to be stuck, at midnight on the 6th day and not have a procedure in place. So they are, and it also gets over they don't have to make a moral decision. They can just plan for it, because they can say to themselves, if I was running a medium-sized business, I'd be saying to myself, right, well, I've got to obviously make it work for the business. We can't just stop trading again. They've nearly killed us already. So I'll make the plan. Personally, yeah, I'm against it. I'll make that moral decision, that ethical decision when we get there, but let's plan for the worst.
Yeah.
That's how I think most pragmatic business people would think. So
yeah, it probably is. Yeah, I agree.
Taken away the ethical question. You plan for it, and then it's so much easier to just push you over the edge and go, well, I haven't got a choice now. We're going to have to do this, otherwise we're not going to survive. And they've implemented it. So I think it's incredibly clever what they've done, and cynical. But of course, it's then whether people stick to it. You have a background, don't you, in sort of human resources, personnel, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I sound old-fashioned, but I do prefer the term personnel. Actually, I wish it had never been changed from personnel to HR. But I mean, my official title is I'm a freelance HR consultant. But the simplest way to say it really is that I just spend my time trying to help small and medium-sized businesses avoid potentially quite expensive mistakes. So I have a reasonable number of clients, and they range from very small companies that employ only 2 or 3 people. In fact, one of them employs 1 person, right through to companies that employ, 100, 150. And sometimes I do slightly more project-based work for much larger organizations that need something sensitive, doing. So I basically I spend my time being paid by clients to keep them the right side of the law when it comes to everything to do with employment law,
right,
and HR. And so I've been very much at the front end of this, really from the first lockdown. And when the furlough scheme started, when I mentioned earlier that I had to watch Rishi Sunak, was because what he was announcing live, I mean, it was evolving in real time. So what Rishi Sunak was announcing, I was having to then go on the web looking at the government guidance, which each iteration would change the guidance. And so it was a nightmare trying to keep on top of it, because they changed the guidance over and over and over again. And then you'd finally end up with the Treasury direction, which is the actual document that Rishi Sunak personally signs. You can actually see his signature on it. And that's the thing that's actually the law, the direction from the Treasury. But I was having to email all my clients on almost a daily basis near the beginning, saying, right, this is the latest on the furlough scheme. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. So, I mean, I can't actually remember when the furlough scheme was introduced. I think it was pretty much the same time as lockdown. I think it was the Friday he announced it of the first week, or might have even been earlier than that. And so, the first few months of lockdown, I was just frantically trying to keep on top of the changes in the guidance and of the scheme. And then it all went from there. And then, once that was all done, by June last year, it was countless redundancies.
So right, so redundancies they are happening. I don't really know what's happened to I don't think it's been the statistics haven't been as frightening as everyone was expecting, have they, in terms of jobless figures?
No, they haven't. It's been quite weird, actually, especially recently, because lots of sectors have got huge staffing shortages. And one of the most surprising ones is hospitality. I've got quite a few clients that run pubs and hotels and restaurants, and I've also got clients who supply those industries as well. And that sector is having a recruitment crisis, which is weird because lots and lots of pubs and restaurants have shut down. And those staff must have gone somewhere. I suspect in many cases they've gone on to benefits, or maybe they were furloughed for a while. So they got used to putting their feet up and doing nothing for 80% of their pay, or in some cases more, because employers would often top it up to nearly 100 or even 100. Right. And so in fact, one of the things I have noticed is that I do think the winners, if you can call it that, will be the people that were never furloughed in the first place because they haven't lost their work ethic, particularly people who have not had to work from home. I think the more business as usual it's been for somebody, the easier it will be for them to recover from it. And one thing I've noticed from clients is that staff that have been returning from furlough, particularly long-term furlough, have developed a somewhat twisted view of the employer-employee relationship, in that the employee is trying to now dictate what they do, rather than the employer saying, well, no, actually, I'm the boss. This is your job. This is what you have to do. So it's an odd thing. So I think furlough has mentally affected a lot of people, and possibly irreparably changed their attitude to work. And because we do have such a generous benefits system, as long as you're prepared to not have much savings and all the rest of it, which a lot of people haven't got savings anyway, I think the toss-up between working and not working is less stark than it once was. And of course, one thing we haven't talked about, but some people are talking about, is the prospect of universal basic income, which furlough wasn't, but furlough was a trial run, or maybe that's too strong, but furlough was akin to something like that, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I think UBI is, it seems obvious that UBI, I mean, UBI is on Klaus Schwab's list, and it seems to be something. I mean, lots of people. There is is it in Scotland or Wales? I think it's Wales, isn't it, where there's a trial UBI scheme going on at the moment.
I didn't actually know that, but one of the worrying things about UBI is creating digital money that with an expiry date.
Yeah,
and that's really concerning.
I think. Well, I mean, the digital money in the Vax Passport and the link to social credit scores and all the rest of it is terrifying, and I just cannot believe how people, intelligent, so-called well-informed people in the media and what have you, seem to not put two and two together. They must be ignoring it. That's the only thing I can think. But or they're in on it. I just don't get it. But I think what you've said about how it affects. I mean, I'm very concerned that even if I'm completely wrong and it's not in any way a conspiracy, best case scenario, the government have done what they've done, and I think you're right. I think people have changed. I mean, work ethic, definitely. I think there's a lot of people now going, well, actually, I'm quite happy on this furlough. If they're not thinking about what's happening to the country and the fact it's all we're going to have to pay it. We're going to have to pay for it. So I don't think we're going to have to pay it back, because I think it'll be, well, I think basically they'll just go after everybody's wealth. So work ethic is lost, as you say. And that has a big effect on your mental health, especially. Yes. I think probably more so men, but probably anybody in the workplace, frankly, because you take a lot of your self-worth and your identity from what you do for a living, don't you? So I think that's a danger. And then trust in government must be at an all-time low amongst virtually everybody, apart from the sort of 40% of people, the hardcore, that believe that Boris Johnson's doing a great job. Division between large groups of the country. I mean, there's a poisonous division between different groups in the country now, I think. I mean, forget about race and all the rest of it, which is always being stirred up anyway. But all the normals, the stuff we're talking about, whether or not you're pro-vax or anti-vax, accordingly to their, the way they divide it. And then fear, the fact that people are now petrified of... it's like we've never had a pandemic before. We've had lots of pandemics. We must have had 3 or 4 significant pandemics in the last 100 years. So...
Well, we have, and I do wonder whether if this current one had never been made anything of in the media, and it appeared as one of those usual headlines you get on something like page 26 of The Guardian that says NHS due to be overwhelmed this winter, which it says every year, from what I can gather. I do wonder whether people would have just completely ignored it, because of course, people on our side. We know that flu conveniently disappeared. And the argument that some would say is, well, that's because of masks and social distancing and hand sanitizer and everything else. And I don't doubt that people caught fewer colds when they weren't mixing with people indoors in the winter, because that's how colds spread. So it's bloody obvious that you're going to catch fewer colds if you don't mix with people. But, the fact that someone can hold in their head two utterly contradictory positions, which is to say that, well, coronavirus is a respiratory flu-like virus, which, is what it is. And flu is a respiratory flu-like virus. But one's disappeared and the other one's everywhere. And the NHS has been completely given over to it. And according to them, pretty much nothing else exists. It just seems to me preposterous. And I think that the media and the government are effectively interchangeable now. I don't really think that we don't have a free press, do we? And we don't have a free media. Therefore, can we have anything resembling a democracy in the absence of that?
Well, I had always understood that democracy was based on we must have a free press. It's a cliche, isn't it? But it's a sort of, I got it. I never really thought it through in great detail until you start seeing in the UK and also, particularly in Canada, which is absolutely amazing watching what's happening in Canada.
Oh, it's gone, hasn't it?
Yeah, totally. But he has, Trudeau, I don't know if you saw, there was a video clip of him at it was like his Gerard Ratner moment, except without the punishment. He was at a party event or something, and the great and the good were there, and he said, this is only recently, and they were saying something about basically they were talking about a friendly press and the fact that that the press had been so complacent and so good, and he said, well, it's amazing what $600 million will buy you, because they've bailed out all of their media with funds. The only media apart from small independents, the only significant media in Canada that hasn't taken millions and millions of dollars is Rebel Media. And they are banned from, speaking to him and all the rest of it.
Well, surprise, surprise. Well, I don't think that it's in newspapers' business model to factor in newspaper sales. It can't be. Any newspaper's business model now must be pretty much government advertising. And advertising from green energy companies. That's one of the one of the sad things about the media is I discovered a Spectator a few years ago. I hadn't been reading it that long, and that's where I first discovered James Delingpole and started listening to his podcast in probably about the beginning of 2019. And I used to really enjoy the Spectator. It was refreshingly, pretty good. But I noticed, early in lockdown, it was pretty skeptical. Fraser Nelson was quite skeptical on their Politics Coffee Shops podcast. And then I noticed, I was reading through it one morning. It was one of my luxuries on a Saturday morning was, read it in bed usually. And I thought, hang on a minute. Almost every advert is a full page advert about green energy and all this, stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay. And then it went full Biden. And Fraser Nelson appeared to rapidly change his tune. And my subscription was up for renewal. And I thought, well, I'm buggered if I'm going to resubscribe to it because there was the odd reasonable columnist, but mostly it was gone. I mean, I used to enjoy Douglas Murray, but he's been conspicuous by his absence throughout most of this. But I mean, going back to what you were saying about creating divisions in society, that's another thing that they've done spectacularly well. And one of the things that I am inevitably going to be involved in is vaccines at work. And I had a call last week, it was a call I'd been dreading because it was the first call from a client asking me whether or not he could only recruit people who'd been vaccinated. And I've been dreading that call.
Yeah.
And I was still at the time in two minds what to say and how to handle that. But so I stuck to telling him what the legal position was, as far as I understood it. And I'll tell you what that is, which is that at the moment, there is not a specific law that says you can't do that unless it conflicts with another law, such as the Equality Act. And the Equality Act is a somewhat controversial piece of legislation in some quarters. And rightly so, in some ways, particularly the abuse of it rather than the thing itself. So I stuck to the legal position and said, well, I don't think it's a particularly good idea commercially because you could be, restricting yourself from a really good candidate pool. But I had to tell him the truth that there's no specific rule against it unless it contravenes. For example, if someone's got a disability that prevents them from having the vaccine, then that could be direct discrimination. So there's all sorts of overlapping areas in some of these laws. And I just thought, I had my head in my hands and I just thought, he's not a particularly big client. And I just thought, if he comes back to me and says, look, I want you to help me do this, I've now made up my mind. I'm just going to refuse and say, no, I can't in conscience do this. And I'm just going to have to let him go.
Well, well done. Well done you. But it is difficult, isn't it, when it's your business? It
is difficult. But you have to have, I think the thing about principles is you actually have to know what they are.
Yeah.
And there's a degree of testing them out sometimes, and we're all, put in situations sometimes when we don't really have a position on a subject until we're forced to. But I've pretty much decided now that I won't have any part of it. And if that hurts me financially, I don't care, frankly. It's I won't do it because I think it makes you compliant in something that I consider to be pretty evil, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, myself and my brother have had serious conversations about this because neither of us are vaccinated and neither of us intend to be. We both recently, actually, he bought it first and then I bought from the same people, bought some ivermectin and various other bits and pieces. And the primary reason for that was, and the primary reason he bought it was because he'd been thinking ahead and he said, well, he works in a university and they are, they love introducing everything to, everything they can possibly introduce to make life difficult for anybody. So, I'll give you an example.
University HR departments are one of the worst. There's others. We can go into that later if you want. But they're pretty.
They are horrendous. I'll give you an example of a story he told me at the weekend. He said they've been told that they've got to come into. He's been working at home online, and he's been able to do that because he works one-to-one with students anyway. So it hasn't had much of an impact on what he does, and. But he would rather go in and do it one-to-one, face-to-face. Anyway, they've now decided the university is going to go back. Well, I suppose it's gone back now. I don't know when they go back. Maybe a couple of weeks.
Roughly now, isn't it?
Yeah. The university is going to go back. They are going to do stuff face-to-face, but in the lectures there will be plastic screens, wipe down, this, that, and the other. All stuff that's been totally discredited. Ages ago. Masks, exactly. All the rest of it. So all that's got to happen, and they're going to have cleaning schedules and this, that, and the other. But because he's one-to-one, and so are the people in his department, they've established, well, you can't really be one-to-one, both of you in front of a laptop, because that wouldn't work. So what we'll do, you can still do it online, but you have to come into university, and the students will be in one room, and you will be in another room, and you'll do it online on campus. So,
Right.
So basically, that says to me that I think that says to me they resent the fact that there might be a group of lecturers or whatever that are still working from home. So they're going to that's not fair. So we're going to make you come in, but then you can't do. You're only going to do what you'd have done at home anyway, which is the most ridiculous. So I said to him, well, what you should do is play the game and say, well, that's all well and good, but I spend £300 a month on fuel. Doesn't seem very green to me.
No, that's a clever idea. Yeah. Well, he could just say, well, why don't you just pretend I'm there, and I'll just stay at home.
Well, you can imagine they don't. I mean, they are horrendous. But it's. I mean, that's the stupidity that's at work, and it's frightening. But he anyway. Sorry, the reason he was saying this was the reason he's got the ivermectin and what have you. He said it might be that at some point I have to keep my job. I have to take the vaccine. And I said, well, he's as convinced as me about it all. And I said, well, you'd have to find something else to do, wouldn't you? Because he has already got 2 or 3 other different sources of income that are academe based. And he said, well, I could probably live on that and everything else. But I said, I don't know. I think eventually it's going to be lost. And I was quite surprised. And
yeah, that must have been quite disappointing to hear him say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, because he's totally on board, exactly the same as me. But what made me think, actually, and the reason I'm telling you this, is he then said, well, we've only got our mother left, and she's quite reliant on us. And he said, well, one of us, if they do bring it in big time, and you are effectively excluded from society, someone's going to have to be there for Mum. And you think, well, if it gets right down to it, he's got a good point. So he'd actually thought it through, which is what you were saying. He's thought it all the way through to the bitter end. And he's kind of come to the conclusion that, well, it's all well and good having principles, but you can't leave your old mum on her own. So, I mean, I've been there for all through this 18 months, and she's been poorly and everything else, and I've been picking her up off the floor and all the rest of it when she's been poorly, and we've never taken her to hospital because we didn't think she'd come out again. So she's and she didn't want to either. I mean, she was desperate to keep away. So it's not that we're not there for her, but yes, there does come that point. So it's a bit different for me because I'm self-employed. So I think I'm probably I'll find another way around the problem. But
well, yeah. I mean, it goes. I mean, in a way, I respect his thought process. I mean, he's obviously thinking of it in a very logical way, and it seems he's prepared to take one for the family team, as it were. But it shouldn't have to be like that, should it? And if he's buying ivermectin as a potential counter to the effects of the vaccine, I mean, that it says it all, doesn't it? I mean,
exactly.
I mean, the latest. I mean, a few weeks ago, as you know, they mandated vaccines for care home workers, and there's already a recruitment crisis in the care sector. And because the pay is pretty rubbish, it doesn't always attract the most, the best workers. A lot of them are very good, but a lot of them are just phoning it in. So if they do the same for nurses, which they're in consultation with at the moment, that's going to create an even bigger recruitment crisis. And a lot of nurses are from ethnic minorities and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. We know that there's a lower vaccine uptake in the ethnic minority population. And so I think that if they start throwing their weight around even more and saying that entire sectors have to be vaccinated, they're going to create enormous problems in the NHS and in the private sector, where it'll be impossible to recruit staff, and they won't necessarily be able to use the usual route of getting them from the Philippines and places like that, because they may not want to be vaccinated. So, they really, this maybe goes down more of the incompetence than the conspiracy route, because, why would you conspire to have fewer nurses? Or I don't know, maybe if you're depopulated, I mean, who knows? I mean, I've given up trying to. I'm not quite sure where I fall on the conspiracy continuum. I mean, to say I change my mind regularly is probably wrong. It's more like I haven't really ever made up my mind about what really is going on. I just know that what's going on is deeply, deeply wrong. And it's as though if someone sat round in a meeting and said, right, well, what's the best way we could destroy everything that's good about England and Great Britain? Then, accident or not, this would be probably the best way of doing it.
I'm sure that however many people are listening to this will all be nodding. I mean, I think that's the thing that we all on this side of the argument have in common. I mean, if you wanted to, this almost boils back down to this whole thing about conspiracy versus incompetence or whatever. So many things are happening, all of which are only going to have one effect on the nation state and the people of this country, and everything. You can think about. I'm hoping to speak to somebody who's very instrumental in reporting on the sort of 1,000 migrants a day that are landing on the beaches in Dover.
That's interesting.
In the near future, so that should be interesting. I'll have a short chat with him, But if you look at that, and it's all, it's terrible, we're wringing our hands, there's nothing we can do about it. Well, there's nothing you can do about that, but you could stop an entire nation from leaving the country or coming back into the country, or as soon as you want to. Heathrow and Gatwick could be closed overnight, but you can't stop people coming in dinghies. I just don't believe you. I think it's a lie. So there's that.
Yes, I agree. Yeah,
and then there's all of this stuff, and the other thing. Obviously. James Delingpole openly refers to the shot as the kill shot and all the rest of it. And of course, that's very emotive. Well, I mean, it should be emotive if it's true. But you look at it and you go, it really is. I suppose we all have our Bembridge point, don't we? Where we go, don't mean to use him specifically, but, I think you know what I mean. He's at one end of the scale in terms of what he's prepared to say or what he believes and what he's prepared to say might be possible. And I understand why, and I'm sort of further down that scale, but I'm not. I just think kill shot, really, it's But then you look at things like the drugging of was it midazolam or something? I can't remember the name of
midazolam. Midazolam.
I mean, that seems pretty obvious that they. I mean, the amount of people that were. When people that aren't even old, people in their sort of 50s, and people that have got disabilities are being given do not resuscitate notices without anybody knowing, and then thousands of people allegedly have been basically put to sleep on this stuff. You just think, well, is a kill shot that unreasonable to believe in? And even if you say no, it's not that. It's just they are pushing through something that's untested, and it's killing more people. It's still a small percentage of people that it's actually killing. It's 1,200, 1,300 people out of 40 million or something, plus all the other injuries. But even if you say all of that and say, that's terrible enough, but okay, you could kind of say, well, the percentages are small. But then what do they think is going to happen to the population? Closing down the NHS for 18 months, building up massive waiting lists for things like cancer and heart disease and strokes, then going into a winter where the NHS is hardly functioning and with maybe losing 20 or 30% of their staff. That's going to kill tens or hundreds of thousands of people. Surely.
Yeah, it will. I mean, I've got a reasonably big family, and myself, my wife and my son are the only members of that family that haven't been vaccinated. And so I hope that the whole kill shot thing is wrong. Obviously, for obvious reasons, and I'm sure you're in a similar position with members of your family. Yeah. But, and I've said this to a few people now, that I have every sympathy with anybody who has almost within reason any conspiracy theory about this, because what has happened has been so unbelievable And if you could go back in time 2 years, a mere 2 years, if you told someone what has happened in 2021, they wouldn't believe you. They think you were off your rocker.
Yeah.
You know, especially if you were using facts like the death for any reason within 28 days, the average age of death being older than the average life expectancy in the UK, and all those facts that all of us on this side know parrot fashion.
Yeah.
They would think you've gone stark raving mad. So I hope James Delingpole is wrong. And I think he hopes he's wrong as well.
Yes.
I think I've heard him say it.
He has.
But I have every sympathy. I have every sympathy for somebody, you know, who is preparing. And I think if somebody is, let's say they're choosing to buy gold, for example, or let's say they're choosing to get a year's worth of rice and dried chickpeas in their cupboard, I honestly don't blame them, because what you said early in this podcast about you I can't remember whether you said you consider the government your enemy or you consider yourself the enemy of the government, but those two things I suppose are interchangeable in a way.
Yeah.
Or at least they are for the purposes of what I'm saying. I have every sympathy. And I've been lucky in a way. I haven't had a relative die through lack of care in this whole thing. I haven't had to not to visit an elderly relative in a care home or anything like that. So me personally, I haven't experienced the visceral despair that some people have experienced during lockdown and during this. But I don't think that makes me any less qualified to have a pretty strong opinion. And I've always had that. I mean, one of the things that I felt and still feel incredibly strongly about is masks. They make me nauseous when I see people wearing them. I have an absolute, it's not quite a phobia, but it's just a visceral hatred for them. And I don't really know where that comes from, apart from the fact that I quite like the human face, and I think it's important that we all see each other's faces all the time. And I never wore one, and I just would stride bold as brass into shops and everywhere else without wearing one. Yeah. But I'm a reasonably fit, 6 foot tall, 51-year-old guy who's in reasonable shape, and it's unlikely that someone's going to pick on me. Because I don't look like the sort of person that could be that easily picked on. So it was easy for me, but it's not so easy for some old lady or someone else who's
exactly. I mean,
perceived as vulnerable.
There are young. I mean, I've noticed whenever you hear the stories of people that have actually had a hard time, and it's rare, but when you hear the stories of people who've had a hard time in a shop and been picked on or rounded on or whatever, it is almost without exception a small, younger woman, probably under 30 or something. And and at least half the time, it's a bloke doing it. They just think,
it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. I mean, as soon as they introduced masks in schools, I got a 13-year-old son, and I got him a mask exemption. And I'm very, very thankful that both my wife and I'm proud as punch to say my son is they both completely get it. Yeah. My son is, he's as skeptical as me. And he doesn't want the vaccine, and under no circumstances is he going to have it.
I mean, that must be a real fear for parents at the moment.
Yeah, I think it is. And I know, I mean, I can only imagine how dreadful it must be being in a marriage or in a family where you're the only person in the household that can see through this. Yeah. And I know I've actually met someone earlier this year whose marriage has been pretty much ruined because of this. And it's heartbreaking. This person's got a couple of kids. And it's heartbreaking. And he's not the only example I've come across where people are living in you can't put it more strongly, they're living in a nightmare where everyone around them appears to have lost their minds.
It really is. You wouldn't, if a film was made of it, you wouldn't believe that it wouldn't sound like it was credible, would it? I mean, it is just the things that happen and the stories you hear and no, it is, as you say, the worst thing. I mean, if you had been in a scenario where you had got somebody in hospital, a loved one in hospital, and you couldn't visit them and they died, or if, as you say, you've got half the family or one of the two parents is one way and the other is the other, it's horrendous because it no matter which side of the argument you're on, it is kind of life and death, isn't it? I mean, it's
it
people,
is. Yeah.
You know,
it is. I mean, it reminds me in a very small way of the Brexit argument. But it's like Brexit on acid, isn't it? It's Brexit times a million.
Yeah.
You know, and this, I mean, I've deliberately tried not to fall out with family members by just avoiding talking about it.
Yes.
And just changing the subject. And when people have asked me if I've been vaccinated, I've, usually given some flippant response. In some cases, I've just blatantly told the truth. In other cases, I've been a bit more flippant. But I mean, it's fractured our society in a way that, like I said, makes Brexit look like a kids' tea party.
No, it is. I mean, as I say, even if there is not even one part of this is a conspiracy, I think the effect it's had on society has been permanent and really bad. So in terms then of talking of permanence and what have you, so you've already said that you've made a principled decision based on what you're going to do if clients start coming to you with questions on vaccination. And then, of course, there's Vaccination Passport. I was aware of the Equality Act and the idea that perhaps that could be used. What's your general experience of, obviously without going into details, of companies that you're aware of? How are they planning for this? You mentioned one company was it just that one company that's approached you so far, or do you think?
Yeah, just one so far. And also the vaccine passport would probably be more on the customer side of things rather than the staff side of things. So it may be that I wouldn't get too involved with that. I mean, sometimes they ask me slightly more commercial, generally commercial related questions, but it's mostly related to employment. So I think my involvement or non-involvement, depending, would be probably on A, whether they can insist on new staff being vaccinated, and B, whether they can insist on all current staff being vaccinated, and can they sack somebody for not being vaccinated? Now, the answer at the moment to that, as far as I'm aware, is that they wouldn't be able to sack somebody for not being vaccinated unless it was mandated by the state, because employment contracts are by nature evolving documents, so they get superseded by legislation. So for an obvious example of that would be the minimum wage. If your employment contract still said you were getting £5 an hour, but the minimum wage is now £8.93, excuse me, let me just clear my throat, £8.93, then any legislation supersedes what's written in a contract. So statutory rights are not signable away. But if someone's been employed for less than 2 years, they can be fired and they're not able to claim unfair dismissal through the employment tribunal system unless you have contravened another law. This comes up quite a lot. There's no right to automatic claim for unfair dismissal unless you have, for example, blown the whistle and raised a health and safety query, or if you happen to be involved in union activities and they don't like it and they sack you for that, or if you are, let's say you happen to be gay and they're really homophobic and they decide they don't like gays, so they're going to sack you for that. Well, that's against the law from day one, right. So you get certain rights which are called day one rights. Other rights only kick in until 2 years continuous service. And so you can be pretty much sacked for any reason, as long as it doesn't break another law within the first 2 years of employment. But this comes on to the employment tribunal system itself. I don't think it's going to be sympathetic to rebels in this system. And there was a reasonably recent example, and it was a lorry driver, and he was supposed to wear a mask in his cab on his own when he visited client premises. So he would be going to drop off some goods in a yard, and very often the drivers stay in their cab while it's unloaded, or they get out and have a chin wag, and a fag and a cup of coffee and whatnot. But this guy was staying in his cab, but the client complained to the transport company, the logistics company. They sacked the driver for gross misconduct for not wearing his mask in his cab, because they said, well, it's a client requirement, so that's potentially a fair reason for dismissal, which technically it can be. He tried to take them to an employment tribunal for unfair dismissal, and his claim failed because the tribunal system, like with most of the other courts, is going to follow the orthodoxy.
Yeah.
So, and I hear a lot of people talking about, oh, you can sue people and you can do this and you can do that. Let's take people to court. But we know from the Simon Dolan case, and we know from other attempts at legislation, trying to attack this through the legal system is futile.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that the tribunals will take a dim view of anybody who they see as a health risk to other workers and all other associated things to do with that, because they've also swallowed the orthodoxy, or they're part of the establishment, or both. And so I think that a lot of people that get on the wrong end of an employment issue will probably find, sadly, that the tribunal system won't be their friend in this, which is a shame.
I agree. I mean, when we were talking about the press and the fact that a free press is everything when it comes to democracy, the other thing, of course, is the courts and the police. I think the police have been politicised purposefully over the last 10 or 15, maybe 20 years anyway. But and that's showing up now, but also in the way that they police different pressure groups. But also well,
look at the way that, look at the soft touch they have with someone like Extinction Rebellion, or Black Lives Matter, whereas they'd give a right old kicking to anti-lockdown protesters. And one of the things that, and again, this was quite early on last year, I looked at the police with utter disgust and just thought, you're waving through the state-sanctioned protest groups. And I firmly believe that Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter were utterly and completely state-sanctioned.
Definitely. Well, it's government policy.
Yes, exactly. Well, XR is doing exactly what the government wants them to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the anti-lockdown protests, it seems to have got less heavy-handed now. But I think that's just because of the numbers. They wouldn't be able to be heavy-handed if they wanted to. If you've got 200,000 people marching up Oxford Street, what are you going to do?
Well, if it went, and you obviously always have to be careful when you're talking publicly about this sort of stuff, but were it to go wrong, I think people on our side of the argument now, there are enough people that are genuinely, and I think reasonably, given the fact that people have had their livelihoods, their families, and all sorts of things taken from them. I've always been of the view that it'll never go really tits up until enough people have got nothing left to lose. But I know I've spoken to a few people recently on social media who have said to me, I haven't got anything left to lose. And I think I've lost my job, I've lost my business, my wife's left me, I don't see my kids anymore, I haven't got any money, and you go, well, what do you think happens when you do that to somebody? Well, I mean, and if you've got 200,000 people, of which 15,000 feel like that, at some point, if it kicks off, as you say, if you've got 3,000 police there, it would go wrong very fast. So
It would. It would.
They are playing with fire. I really think they are, but they don't really seem to give a damn. I think there's a lot of hubris around. Getting back to the legality of this, I had a thought. I've had. I come from a property background, and so I've done, as an undergraduate, I did quite a lot of law. So a little, little being a dangerous thing and all that, a little knowledge being a dangerous thing. But what about sort of vicarious liability for employers? Because if you've got, like the case of the shopkeeper that clears the pavement of snow outside his shop, and then somebody slips over on the newly cleared pavement and sues them because he basically interfered with the snow, if you like. So he took on a liability. So what if an employer says you've got to work here, you must have the vaccine. You have the vaccine, and then you have a stroke, and you're 28, and you've got a family of 3. Don't the employers perhaps think that they've got a big liability potential there?
I don't think they do. No. Now, I can't comment on whether they actually would have one because, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, and this whole area is untested so far in the courts, largely. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think probably completely untested at the moment. But I don't think they've thought it through because I think they're just simply relying on government guidance and government advice. So their defence would be, well, we were just doing what we were told. We were told it was, we were following orders.
Exactly.
That's a reliable defence. But again, I mean, if you've got every institution that's been captured, including the courts, and again, take conspiracy away from it. If you've got the courts who genuinely believe that this is a truly global, terrible pandemic and people are at risk, and it would be grossly irresponsible to do anything other than have a vaccine and to do all the other nonsense as well, then to them, and we talked earlier, didn't we, about how do they think? Well, if we're running a thought experiment about how they think, well, if they are genuinely captured and they do genuinely believe it, they're going to say, well, it's obvious, isn't it? They're going to say it's obvious you should do it. And if someone has an adverse reaction, then they'll say, well, yeah, but we're only doing what we were told. And again, it would have to get tested in the courts. But to be tested fairly in the courts, that would have to mean that the courts would treat the matter fairly. And there's absolutely no way of knowing whether they would.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it would boil down to whether or not you had a judge who was either took his job incredibly seriously, or was already minded slightly on our side of things. Because otherwise, I don't think, as you say, I think the courts are pretty much captured, and the police, and this is what I'm very cynical of all these people. There are various people, aren't there, that are out there doing private prosecutions and reading up on sort of ancient common law rights.
Yeah, there are.
And I go, well, I've no doubt that we do have, because I mean, common law is a thing, and I'm no doubt that we do have certain common law rights that are being overridden by laws that have been put in place, probably without proper due diligence and everything else. But the reality is, it doesn't matter if you're right. It doesn't matter if the law's on your side. If they're not going to implement it and they're not going to listen to you, you haven't got a chance. They're just going to... all those poor buggers during World War One that got shot dead for cowardice when they'd got shell shock or something. I mean, it's all well and good if 50 years later they get a pardon, but they still got shot dead. It's
Well, I think there's a. I mean, it goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that I've got every sympathy for anyone, trying to do something. And I know about some of the people that are looking down the common law route. But the trouble is, it relies on the assumption to some extent, and perhaps not with common law to that degree, but most of this stuff relies on the assumption that the other side's going to play fair.
Yeah.
And whether the other side is deliberately not playing fair or thinks it is playing fair but is wrong, it doesn't really make any difference to the outcome. And so I'm not sure that some of the oft mentioned legal cases. I mean, there's this thing that German guy's doing. I'm not sure what the latest is with that. Fulmich. Rainer Fulmich. I mean, I don't know, because you've got the media against them, the legal system against them, huge smear campaigns. And I mean, one movement that I do have a lot of sympathy with is the Us for Them movement. And the lady Beverly Turner is quite heavily involved in that. Right. And she's been very good. And it's all about trying to put children first and protecting children. And because I've got a 13-year-old son, I have skin in the game when it comes to this particularly. And some of those organisations I think their heart is absolutely in the right place, and I do believe they're genuinely doing their best. And I think the world is a much better place for them to be in it. And I mean, much the same could be said about something like GB News. I mean, I still haven't quite made my mind up about GB News. I mean, they seem to vacillate quite a bit. I think in a world without coronavirus, and if we just had things like Brexit and that sort of thing to worry about, then I think GB News would probably have been pretty good. But they're subject to Ofcom rules like everyone else. I mean, a bright shining light on it is someone like Neil Oliver, who I think he has a talent of articulating the way you think about something far more effectively than you possibly could yourself.
I think you're right. I mean,
he really is a legend.
Absolutely. I mean, every one of his monologues or essays or whatever you want to call them, even all the way back in Talk Radio, when he was doing them with Talk Radio and having those sort of discussions with Mike, whatever, I'm Mike. But then these monologues have been really effective. And as you say, he's got a really good way about him and the way he does it. But what I like most about him is he manages to say pretty much exactly what you've just said, what I think, with the same level of simmering anger, and yet he manages to say it in such a way on television that he's not he hasn't got a big hook coming and grabbing him and dragging him off. What he says, if you listen to what he says, he is right out there in terms of, I mean, basically the last one I heard, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but as I heard it at least, he was basically saying, you'll touch my son over my dead body, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's that's effectively what he was saying. I mean, he's a very clever guy, and he I'm not sure if you know about this, but anyone, if anyone is listening, I highly recommend his podcast called Neil Oliver's Love Letter to the British Isles.
Yeah.
It's about half an hour long, and he talks about lots of different places, some of which you've heard of and some of which you almost certainly won't have. And one thing that is very clever is that it's mostly about history and its fascinating aspects and the power of place. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a lovely thing, particularly in the winter on a Sunday afternoon, if you can light the fire and, pour yourself a glass of something smoky, and just sort of sit there and take in a few of these. It's a wonderful thing to do on a winter's day, particularly. But you can tell the way he carefully words some of the things he says, that particularly the recent episodes have been made since lockdown. And he very, very cleverly says things that if you know, and my wife and I often look at each other and just nod and go, yeah, he gets it. He totally gets it. And it's a wonderful thing. If you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend it.
I have heard one or two. I do subscribe to him, but the trouble is, podcasts, there's so many podcasts, and I'm trying to pick podcasts and listen to them. And I mean, I say this is somebody who's obviously doing a podcast, a small podcast, but there are so many podcasts, I find it difficult to find time for all of them. But I don't watch TV, so it does give me that I get the opportunity to listen more. And I do listen to him from time to time. I listened to one the other day.
I think podcasts have been an absolute lifeline for me. I mean, I mean, there's a couple of particularly good, I think. I mean, Irreverent is fantastic.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
I mean, those guys, again, both highly intelligent, highly educated, and so knowledgeable about so many different things. One tends to think of the clergy as being rather of a single track, but that certainly isn't the case for them. But yes, you're right. It would be futile for us to make a list, wouldn't there? Because there are so many.
I agree, though. Irreverent agree. I mean, he was obviously on Dellingpole, and I went and I listen to them every week now, and I look forward to it. And they are good, and they've got a good charisma and a sort of a good interplay between when the three of them are on. There's a very good interplay between the guy in Solcombe and the other two.
Yes.
And I like the fact that whilst they're men of the cloth, they're and probably perhaps because they're men of the cloth, they don't hold back. They say what
no, they don't. You know. I think they're men of the cloth, but they're also men of the world as well.
Yes, yeah.
They're very much men of the world, and I really like that. The one thing I wanted to ask you actually is, have you managed to go to a third Wednesday yet?
Well, funnily enough, I was just about to come on to that. No, I haven't been.
Oh, right.
I've spoken to. I've DM'd. Who have I DM'd? Well, Simon for a start, but then also Dick Dellingpole, and because I live only just down the road from Dick, so I don't know him, but we have spoken. So I'm planning to go to a Worcester one. And there's one tomorrow, isn't there? On the 15th?
Yes. Yeah,
so
there is.
15th of September. So this will probably come out tomorrow. So there's one on the 15th of September. And I know that it's fantastic looking at the website that there's so many are popping up now. And people, I think largely because of what's happening, are starting to organise around it, which I think is fantastic. I mean, I think that could be a really good thing.
Yeah, I think it will. I mean, I tried with some success to get a Cotswolds one going. But it was when pubs were open at the time, but it was really bedwetty. And we managed to secure a venue in a small town not too far from me, run by a very lovely lady who's been an absolute legend in the whole anti-lockdown movement. Right from the beginning, she helped to set up the Lockdown Skeptics Facebook group for when some of us were still on Facebook. Right. And we had a kind of speakeasy private function. I think it was about 2 months ago, something like that, and it was pretty good. But we haven't really managed to get into too much of a vibe yet. We had another private one a few weeks back, and I've met a few of the Third Wednesday crowd. I met Simon, I met Dick, and they're both lovely. And I think that it's a fantastic movement, and I think that we need to get into our vibe a bit, down this way, because there's plenty of us in this area. We just need to try and find somewhere good to go, and just get it going. But I was planning on going to Worcester myself, but I'm not able to make tomorrow, and unfortunately I'm having an operation on my foot in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm not going to be able to drive for a couple of months, which is going to be a bit of a pain.
Is that going to cause you a problem in terms of the hospital and not being jabbed and everything, do you think? Or are you going to be...
No, I'm fortunate to be able to have it done privately. So, but no, I'm not jabbed. I've got to have my first ever PCR test, which I can't avoid. And I'm having it on Monday, next Monday. And so, I mean, sod's law, that's going to be positive, isn't it? Because, most of them are false. So, so I may not make another Third Wednesday for a while, but I highly recommend it. I mean, you meet one of the nicest things about Third Wednesday is you don't have to explain why you're there. It's just handshakes all round, a few drinks, and in my experience, you talk more about interesting things about life in general than you do about, I hate lockdown. Yes, do you hate lockdown as well? It's not like that at all. It's just a load of people glowing with health by the look of most of them. You can pretty much assume that they're unvaccinated. Not that I'm making a suggestion that those two things are in any way connected. But it was, I spent half the time on the last one I went to talking about whiskey with a very interesting chap. So that was good fun.
Well, I am going to go. I think the first one I'm going to be able to go to, all things being equal, is going to be November. So I'm planning. I mean, I think there will be some sort of lockdown by then, but I'm hoping one way or another we might be able to work it out that I can get to one. And if there is one, I'm going to go to the November one with Worcester. But I would also like to go around some of the others. So I've got an invitation from Mr. Zero Hero, who's invited me down to his neck of the woods. So I want to try and do that as well, and I'd also like to get up to the northwest and meet some of the guys up in the northwest too. So I would like to sort of get around and to all of them, but I haven't been to any yet. But Worcester will be my local, if you like, because that's literally, well, it was just down the road. It's a little bit further now, but it's still the closest.
Well, I'd like to get up to the Worcester one, and I actually bought some of the cigarette cards that Dick Dellingpole does.
Right.
Because my son is a bit of a history buff, and he's quite into the Napoleonic era and that sort of thing. One of his favourite films is Waterloo. The other two are Zulu and Master and Commander. So I think he's on the right lines.
Films, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they are. And I bought him a set of Dick's cigarette cards, which I highly recommend. So I met Dick. He came down to one of the Cotswold ones. And we had a good chat. So my son would actually love to come to a third Wednesday. He keeps bugging me about wanting to come, but he looks about 17, so he'll probably get away with it.
Well, basically, given what the government are saying, he's able to decide for himself. I think he could do anything there, can't he?
Yeah, well, indeed. Well, actually, he's a bit of a fan of whiskey, but we try and limit that.
Yes, probably. Yeah, they want to keep him off that for a little while.
He quite likes Penderyn, that Welsh one, but he's allowed a tiny nip on high days and holidays.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm probably old enough because I'm in my mid-50s, and I think I'm of the generation that I'm pretty sure that if I was teething when I was a little kid or wasn't sleeping, I'm pretty sure that I would have probably have been given a little tipple of something on a finger, or in the milk, or half a teaspoon or something. So
would you remember gripe? Would you remember gripe water?
Yeah, I can actually remember the taste of it.
Well, yeah, it tasted like gin, didn't it?
It was, yeah. So I can remember it. I can kind of remember it, but not remember it. But it's a very distinctive taste, definitely.
Yes, yeah. I liked it. I think it had alcohol in those days.
Oh, really? Oh, well, that would explain a lot. My lifestyle is now making a lot of sense.
Yeah, exactly. Same here.
Nature and nurture.
Quite.
Duncan, we're at 1 minute. I said we're going to keep it under an hour. We're at 1 hour 48 minutes.
Oh, crikey!
So we've burst well through our hour, but I do want to try and keep it to a manageable amount.
Yes, of course. That's fun.
Was there anything else you had on your mind that you wanted to table, or that you hadn't heard us talking about before that you wanted to talk about?
No, not really. I mean, the only thing really is, because I know we were sort of umming and ahhing about whether to have a chat, and I know that when you spoke with Simon Roberts recently, you were bemoaning quite rightly the state of human resources in this country, and I couldn't agree more with what you were saying, and I've become almost embarrassed to describe myself as an HR consultant, and like I said earlier, I often prefer the term personnel, but I think that HR as an industry is very good at making work for itself, and the majority of that work, and also making work for other people, and the majority of that work is unnecessary, and HR shouldn't cast a long shadow over the organisation. I mean, basically, HR should serve the organisation and do what's necessary. And most human resource departments could probably be cut by about 90% and still function quite happily. And so, I just really wanted to say that I do agree with that. And if anyone thinks, oh God, he's got an HR person on the show, then I'm a freelance personnel officer, and perhaps that's the best way to think about it.
Given that, in my early years, my very early career, I was an estate agent. So I really can't talk, and given now that I risk to hazard a guess that probably certainly journalists and probably incredibly doctors are now pretty low on the level of respect as well. I don't suppose it matters it's more what you think than what you do, isn't it? But and it's nice to have a wide skill base. It'd be interesting at one of these third Wednesdays to perhaps get some ideas off people, because I'm sure there must be a wide range of different skills and experiences that you could draw on. I think that's one of the reasons why it's good to have people on the ground that have actually made personal relationships.
It's incredibly important, and not everybody you're going to be bosom buddies with. I mean, the good example is Stand in the Park, which I know we haven't mentioned yet. And we've been to a couple of Stand in the Parks. And, you know, all of human life truly is there, isn't there? You've got a very, very wide range of people. I mean, you're one of the ones we went to. One of the people there, buttonholed my wife and started telling her all about how Hitler was misunderstood and blah blah blah, and she's nodded and smiled politely, and so you really do get everything. But it's unless you try, you don't know. And I think one of the things when you get, I mean, I'm in my slightly early 50s, and you're in your sort of mid-ish 50s, but we're a similar age, and I think one of the things you get to, and this is certainly true of me, is that you've got a set of friends and you think, well, that's pretty much my friends now. I'm not going to probably make any more, really. And then you realise, well, in the last 18 months, you realise that that's wrong. And actually, you really do need some new friends. And I think anyone who is feeling lonely or in need of new friends, it takes work and it takes effort. And even if you've got to drive 50 miles to go to a Third Wednesday, go to one and keep going. Yeah. And go to Stand in the Park if there is one near you, because again, you're not going to be instant bosom buddies with people. But, for example, on the day that they stopped the mask mandate on the 19th of July, I went to the local supermarket purely as a social experiment. I didn't actually need anything, but I went there. And almost everybody was wearing a mask. And I happened to be standing next to this bloke, and he was the only other chap in there who wasn't wearing a mask. And, Aldi sell all this useless stuff in the middle. Yeah. That, I'm not saying angle grinders are useless, but, you don't generally buy them with your groceries, do you?
Odd combination of things, aren't they? Yeah.
Odd combination. And we were contemplating the virtues of this, God knows what it was, angle grinder or something. And we were chatting about it. And I just said to him, are you a bit surprised how many people are still wearing masks? And then the floodgates opened. And instantly we were of the same mind. And we were chatting for about half an hour about all the nonsense of everything. It turned out we lived in the same village, although I didn't know him. We ended up swapping phone numbers, which looked a bit suspect in the middle of the supermarket, as you can imagine. But, we're men of the world. So, we did that. Anyway, we've been to a barbecue at their house a couple of weeks ago. And they're coming round here soon. And I have no idea whether this short acquaintance will become a longer term thing. But it might not. I don't care. But, it's just nice to have a social evening with people that are just not discussing the merits of the Pfizer versus the AstraZeneca jab, which is what a lot of normies are talking about. And so I think that every opportunity that anyone gets to have a conversation with somebody who may appear to be of the same mind, you just don't know where it leads. And if there was ever a time when we need people around us, then that time is now.
Very wise words. And I think... I live alone. I'm single, and I think I'm I can live. I'm quite happy in my own company, which is fortunate. But you can imagine it's been, especially at the heart of the lockdown, even though I didn't really pay it a lot of attention. It's no good if everyone else is. So I was rather. I have been rather isolated, not working for a large number of months and all the rest of it. But I've been fairly robust, I think. I think I'm still fairly robust. I've kind of got my head in the right place. But I don't know if you've noticed when you were on there, but I've noticed on Twitter there are a lot of people now, or a good number of people, that are really looking a bit frayed. And today there was a sad story of in fact, two people who had committed suicide. One, I think, was being pursued by some complete and utter nutcase on Twitter and being stalked and everything. So I don't think that was necessarily linked. But there are a lot of desperate people out there, and I think I've got my head straight for the winter, but I think this winter could be very tough because if we go through another winter like we've just been through last year, based on the last 2 years, it's a lot to get through if you haven't got support. So I think you're absolutely right. If you can get out there and do a third Wednesday or do a stand in the park or anything like that, even just one meeting would probably just set your reset button, I suspect.
It can be a tonic for the soul. It really can. And even having an uplifting conversation with someone of a similar mind. And of course, you might disagree on politics. You may have very little in common, but at least you've got this.
Yeah.
And I think, having a break from Twitter, I think, is pretty healthy from time to time because it can drive you mad. Yeah. I left Facebook ages ago because it just, again, to use the vernacular, it just did my head in. But I mean, as I said, I am fortunate. I'm fairly recently married, which is nice. Second time around, and very happily married, and I've got children. But actually, I wanted to say something to you and to others as well. It is that one of the things that I've been almost in awe of actually is how many people on our side who are prepared to be vocal who don't have children. And there are certain people I've met who are passionate about protecting children, and they don't have skin in the game. They, in that sense, but
quite literally, yeah.
But they're still prepared to stand up. And I think, particularly for single people, getting through the winter, it's really important to just make these connections. And I mean, everyone hates Zoom drinks. I mean, Zoom drinks are a vile invention. But I mean, if you live halfway around the country, I mean, let's face it. I mean, a few whiskies and a good old chat with a mate 100 miles away is better than nothing at all.
Yeah. I mean, I set up a Zoom group for all of the oldies in my village, sort of over 70, and set it up, and they've managed to set up a little how-to on how to use Zoom and everything, put it on the village website, and that's still going strong now, and they have 2 or 3 or 4 different groups all meeting and so it's fantastic really, because a lot of them are, and this is telling, a lot of them, including my mother, are nowhere near as mobile now as they were 18 months ago.
Surprise, surprise.
Surprise, surprise, exactly. So, and I mean, they're not sort of lazy catch potatoes. They would normally, being out in the garden and stuff, but, you just, if you're not out and about and, going to coffee mornings and all that sort of stuff. And they've all played by the rules completely because, it's, the government says this and the government says that. So, so they're doing Zoom, and that's worked for them. And I have done the odd Zoom with mates right at the beginning when it was all a bit new, and it was like, well, we've got to do something, so let's have a go at that. And no, they were pretty dire. But I think if maybe a few glasses of something strong, and or watch a film together, because you could now stream films together, can't you? Although the trouble with that is I've got two. If I'm going to watch a film, I want to watch a film. I don't want to be constantly chatting through it. So
me too. Yeah,
I'm a grumpy.
That's wrong.
Like that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing on exactly the same part of my personality is that if I'm with a girl and we're out eating, and I say, "Do you want chips as a side order?" and she says, "No, I'll have some of yours," I'll just get 2 lots of chips. That's it. Just
that's I mean, that's obvious, isn't it? I mean, it's just
typical bloke thing. It's what divides men and women. I said, well, why? I only want 2. Yes, but I want all of mine. So I'll buy you all yours. But, anyway.
And if you don't want them, then I'll have the rest.
Exactly. Yeah.
Actually, I was going to.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say to you actually. How's your work been? You say you're self-employed. I mean.
It's been dreadful. It's been absolutely dreadful. I haven't worked. I've worked since March 2020. I've done about 5 weeks' work.
That's crazy, isn't it?
So I can now work again as of the 19th of July. But I hadn't booked anything until August, and then things happened in August with my mother being ill and stuff, so I had to cancel that. So I haven't actually worked since the 19th of July. Oh no, I've done one weekend. So I've got so I've done a little bit of work. I'm doing a yacht delivery from Genoa to Lefkas in Greece, which I'm doing in October. So I'm looking forward to that. Although I'm looking forward to it, but the problem is, like you were saying with PCR, I'm going to have my first PCR test, which I'm not looking forward to. And because I'm not jabbed, as a seafarer, actually, a lot of this doesn't, the travel, I don't have to isolate anywhere unless I get a positive test. So if I ended up in Lefkas after I've delivered the yacht and Greece was then red listed, if I was just a surveyor, for example, I'd have to come back and I'd have to spend 10 days in an expensive, crappy hotel in Heathrow, which is ridiculous. But because I've got a seafarer's ticket, I don't have to isolate, so I can come back and I have to take a test 3 days in or something, and the normal travel test before I leave, and that's all I have to do. So apparently seafarers don't spread the virus, it would seem, but
it's probably all the rum, isn't it?
It might be, yeah.
And the sodomy and the lash.
Yeah, the virus is the least of our worries, but it's so I've got I've done virtually nothing, but I am doing a little bit. But I am a bit concerned because it's into October. I should get that one job done. Then I think it's going to be. I think just travelling over the winter is going to be a nightmare because I think it'll be the same again. But we'll see. We'll see where it goes. But
we will. We'll see. But good. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk. Well, it's been good fun.
Good to speak. I know we have had the odd exchange of messages and stuff, so it's really good to catch up. And what we'll have to do is I hope your foot operation goes well.
Thank you. So do I.
And once you're mobile again, so it sounds like it's going to be probably Christmas time or after Christmas by the sound you're...
Probably. I mean, if I can get my good lady wife to ferry me around, I may well see you at the third Wednesday, because I do plan to go to the Worcester one, so you never know, we might be able to enjoy a drink in IRL, as they say.
Exactly. No, that would be fantastic. Well, and also a perfect excuse if you can't drive. Yes, if you could get the wife.
Well, yes. Very true, yes. So that's brilliant. Well, thank you.
Well, fantastic. Well, Duncan, thank you very much for giving us 2 hours of your time. I'm sure that you've listened to, I know, a lot of these podcasts, and I think a lot of people, again, like the Third Wednesday thing and the Stand in the Park and everything else, it's quite nice sometimes just to listen to people and think, you know what, that's exactly where I am, or it is about this or whatever. But I hope it does some good at least, and we've managed to keep it under. We're at just over 2 hours, which is a lot better than I managed with one or two other people, where we pushed on into the early hours, probably because we were both drinking, whereas I've been on cups of tea. So that might be the reason. But fantastic to talk to you, and I'm very impressed with your principled stand on the vaccine side of things with your business. I think that's admirable, and
thank you.
It's easy to insist, people, like with people with pubs, where people are insisting just open and we'll support you. It's all well and good until your livelihood's on the line, or it really makes a personal cost. So I think it isn't easy to do those sort of things. So congratulations, and I'm sure we'll speak again through the ether before we meet in person at the third Wednesday, perhaps in Worcester.
Exactly. And also, just lastly, thank you for doing this, because these things are a labour of love, and it takes time and effort, and you may feel sometimes that you're speaking into the ether, but people are listening, and I think I know from personal experience that it does good. So you are doing good. So well, thank you. Thank you for that.
That's very kind of you to say, and I mean, lots of other people doing similar things, and I listen to a lot of them. Try to keep things varied, and it's been great to speak to a variety of different people, including yourself. So I think hopefully I'm going to try and continue that, and as I get better, be able to get more information out of my guests over a shorter period of time, which I'm sure will be something that everybody is grateful for. But in the meantime, Duncan, thank you very much, and thanks for joining us on Vox Pop, and we'll speak again in real life very soon.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.